I thought I'd do something a little different that we've never done before. And this all started many years ago after a men's conference, one of the second ones or something like that. I was totally exhausted, just completely exhausted after 7 days. And I went to my dad's lake cabin. He had a shack and a lake, and I was going to spend a few days catching up on sleep and catching up on my notes. About 10 o'clock one morning, I went outside. The sun was shining. It was a real nice autumn day. And so I sat down on the ground, leaned up against this birch tree, and I fell asleep. I woke up about a half hour later, and I was totally covered with birch leaves. The tree had shed all of its leaves in that half hour I was leaning against the tree. I've seen a maple tree do that once.
Is that when your beard turned white?
Yeah, I've been Rip ever since. I started thinking about that, and it's like these beautiful golden leaves are there. I missed them coming down through the sunlight, but they landed on me, and I was picking them up, and I'm looking at each one that I could look at, but how can I get through all of the leaves of a tree? I thought, what can I do what kind of presentation can I do this weekend? And I started thinking about the leaves on the tree, and that led me to the next thing where, as I grew up, my grandma, when she'd send a birthday card or something like that, she'd send a little aphorism. She'd pull something out. Everybody knows the cliche, the longest journey starts with the first step, that kind of thing, that she'd always include one of those things in a birthday card. And I used to laugh about that when I was a kid. Grandma's just an old fart. Actually, it stuck. It really stuck with me. As a poet, I started looking for all of these things with poetry. Poetry led me places to different poets and different writers. And so I went back over my notebooks for the last 40 years that I've been doing this, and I pulled out some of those aphorisms that I got from different poets, different participants. It's not just poetry. I might have heard the name of some writer. I'd study and I'd read, and so I just wanted to share some of these, and I thought, just sit back like you're leaning up against the birch tree, and I'm going to let these aphorisms like leaves fall on top of you. They might grab a hold of you. Something like the image in a story might grab you. These are actual words.
So we wake up 30 minutes from now, we'll be covered with these?
Yes, exactly. But I'm going to start with a negative one, and I want everything after this to continue. And this is from Socrates, right? Socrates in the Phaedrus book, or he said, "I am a lover of learning, and the trees and open country won't teach me anything, whereas men in town do." Well, to me, that's just BS, right? Robert Bly said, "In a poem, as in a human body, what is invisible makes all the difference." In one of the Kabir poems that Robert translated, Kabir's instinct told him it was inside and what it is worth. Gary Snyder, one of my favorite poets, he wrote this in an essay, not in a poem. "In this old Occidental culture, our teaching elders are books. Books are our grandparents. We don't have the history of the oral storytelling carrying us as well as it should. We're trying to rejuvenate that right now. But Gary Snyder caught on a number of years ago. Robert Frost. Poetry is like taking life by the throat. Poetry begins as a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, a homesickness, a love sickness. It is a reaching toward expressions, an effort to find fulfillment. A complete poem is one where an emotion finds the thought, and the thought finds the meaning. You hear how that starts on the inside and moves to the outside. We've been talking about that this weekend. Or Robert Frost also said, happiness makes up in height what it lacks in length.
Who said that?
Robert Frost. Robert Sardello is a psychologist and a writer. And this is from his book, Love and the Soul of the World. I'm going to go through a few of them here. Love is the interior presence of beauty. Feeling is the consciousness of beauty. Rhythm is the essence of the world as feeling. Self-love is the equivalent to self-consciousness. And self-consciousness is not a consciousness of the self, but a consciousness from the self. Here's another beautiful one by Sardello. The I gives, and the ego takes. The I knows itself through its capacity to create awareness. The desire for self-feeling must come from the outside. Rudolf Steiner. Love must turn to the self. Only in order to turn the self into service in the world. The rose adorns itself only in order to adorn the garden. The rose adorns herself only in order to adorn the garden. Here's one from our old friend, Martin Prechtel. He told this to me personally. He said, efficiency is overrated. Carolyn Casey, she's been a participant at the Great Mother for years. Beauty is abundantly available to the unhurried mind. Isn't that amazing? That's why I ask you to read slowly, Dick. Yep. Beauty is abundantly available to the unhurried mind. So, one of my favorite poets is Juan Ramon Jimenez. And many of you know the poem, I Not I. Well, he has wonderful essays. I hope someday to give a presentation about Juan Ramon Jimenez. Silence does not waste time. It fills it. Yes, and the only thing that fills time is silence. So that time shared with noise is time lost. But silence conquers time, puts it back together, and makes it whole. Unity is the noble daughter of silence. Dispersion, the mad stepchild of noise. Another one. If you cannot be gold, be silver, but not silver with gold plating. Memory doesn't come from a higher power than forgetting does. We ought not forget that earth, air, and water are stronger at forgetting than they are at remembering. So when all that shame comes up inside of us, you know, John Stokes, he was here for a couple years. John was a man from Florida who was living in Australia, and he began his tracking life as a tracker under the teaching of an Aboriginal tracker. And then John brought some of his tracking tips to us. Tracking is a way of looking at the world. Attention leads to awareness, which leads to relaxation. What we don't speak to, we don't understand. What we don't understand, we fear. What we fear, we want to destroy. Here's the tracker's equation by John Stokes. Safe plus secure plus comfortable equals death. He also said, don't think a feeling, feel it. The tragedy of life is not the sorrow, but what you miss. Now, this next man, poetry didn't lead me to Nikos Kazantzakis. He was one of my favorite writers as a young man before I really dove into poetry. But I still have to quote one of my favorites. Nikos wrote, I said to the almond tree, friend, speak to me of God. And the almond tree blossomed. Isn't that learning that communication? He also said, my entire soul is a cry, and all my work, the commentary on that cry. Separately, we die one by one. But all together, we are immortal. And this comes from one of my favorite books, Zorba the Greek. Africans worship the serpent because its whole body touches the ground, and therefore must know all the earth's secrets. It knows them with its belly, with its tail, and with its head. It is always in contact or mingled with the mother. We educated people are just empty-headed birds in the air. Nikos Kazantzakis. So I want to give you a few from the Sufi tradition. You know, Robert introduced us to a lot of Sufi songs, and he translated Sufi poets, and I followed some of those guys down these different paths, and I found other masters and other thinkers. And here's Idris Shah, who wrote The Way of the Sufi. Sufis do not claim to be great intellectuals, and they certainly do not pose as gurus or intoxicated mystics, except sometimes to illustrate the limitations of these. Junaid of Baghdad, this goes back to about the late 800s. He was a Persian mystic. Water derives its color from the vessel that holds it. This is another one. This is a good one for men's work. If you seek a brother to share your burden, truly, brothers are hard to find. But if you are in search of someone whose burden you can share, there's no scarcity of brothers. I decided to only pick one from Rumi because he's so well known around the world. I use this because this is a quote from which I took my latest book title. And this has a number of layers. I'm going to read it twice. Somebody said I should read things twice. It isn't enough to say before God, I've done this, I've done that. We must show God the fruits from the seeds of our accidents. I'm going to say this again. It's not enough to say before God, I've done this, I've done that. We must show God the fruits from the seeds of our accidents. You know, my dad told me when I was a young father, he says, I don't know if I'm doing a good job as a dad, and I won't know by looking at you, but I think by looking at my grandson and how he is, I'll know if I did a good job. I have another quote from my dad later on. This is but Attar. Attar wrote The Conference of Birds. It's a great Persian classic. And he lived right before Rumi, and they may have known one another. He's definitely one of the most important writers in Islam. Attar. In this strange school, the inward eye detects 100,000 yearning intellects. But failure dogs the analytic mind, which whimpers like a child who was born deaf and blind. Open your heart. And here's another one, just one by Hafez. You know, again, a lot of people are quoting Hafez and translating him. Hafez. We can come to God dressed for dancing, or we can be carried on a stretcher to God's hospital. Now, Ezra Pound, influential American poet, a quote, it's not from one of his poems, but he's famous for this quote. The flavors of a peach and apricot are not lost from generation to generation. Neither are they transmitted by book learning. Here's Thomas Hardy, the novelist. The business of the poet and the novelist is to show the sorriness underlying the grandest things and the grandeur underlying the sorriest things. The grandeur underlying the sorriest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had that in that story. Here's a medieval alchemist's warning. Never have heat in your process that is hotter than fresh horse dung. I really like this one. Another Sufi teacher, Jafar al-Sadiq. He was born in the 700s, the 8th century. Tell people about your religion without the use of your tongue. Tell people about your religion without the use of your tongue. This is an American writer, Louis Adamich. He died in 1951. Life is like licking honey off of a thorn. Yeah. Jose Ortega y Gasset was a philosopher, a great philosopher. Died in 1955. Tell me what you pay attention to, and I will tell you who you are. Here's another one by Ortega y Gasset. Yo soy yo y mis circunstancias. I am I and my circumstances. Or I am I and my surroundings. That word can be both. Here's another one by Ortega y Gasset. There are 4 things men do when they come together. They hunt, they dance, they race, and they discourse. So they hunt and they dance, they race, they compete, and they discourse.
We'll be holding the races later.
Us old guys get a head start, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, here's one by Jerry Young, my dad. I first heard him use this, and he used it many times, years and years ago, probably during the Vietnam War. It's probably the first time I heard this. And he was making fun of his buddies. He was being satirical. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've already made up my mind. William Stafford. Again, we hear a lot of William Stafford here, but I just wanted to use this short one. It's actually a little short poem. Hard-working hunters beyond the taiga sharpen their knives, get up early, and watch carefully. They have a name for everyone else. People who talk about God. That's the difference between the pulpit and the forest. So that leads me to some quotes by Robert Bringhurst. who we're bringing in the fall.
Be at the fall conference.
He'll be here at the fall conference. Walton's made some connection. Hopefully, he's an elderly man, so hopefully he'll still be able to make it. He has a book called The Tree of Meaning. It's one of Ben's favorites right now. When I read the book a number of years ago, I like to underline passages, and I just kept underlining them. And I have 20 pages of the typed out with the quotes that I underlined from that book. But I'm just going to give you 4 quotes from the book, and then I'll end. I started with the birch tree. I'm going to end with Words from the Tree of Meaning by Robert Bringhurst. The work of the myth teller or poet, like that of the scientists, is learning how to think, not what to believe. Poetry is the language of being, the breath, the voice, the song, the speed of being. It does not need us. We are the ones in need of it. If we haven't learned how to hear it, we will also never speak it. That's the poetry, the language of being. If we haven't learned how to hear it, we will also never speak it. Poetry, like science, is a way of finding out by trying to state perceptively and clearly what exists and what is going on. That is too much for the self to handle. What exists and what is going on, that is too much for the self to handle. And I'll finish with this quote, this passage. If you want to understand the tree, you have to encounter it in the forest. If you want to understand the river, you have to explore the watershed. And if you want to understand the story, you have to go beyond it into the ecosystem of stories. And that's where we were this morning, and we're going to continue today. We're going to go into the ritual ecosystem of stories this evening, and we're preparing that this afternoon. Those are the leaves of trees, the birch tree from my dad's place up on a northern lake. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim.